It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And I am going to start on a topic today that I recognize is very sensitive for a lot of people. And I'm going to go real slow and might do multiple parts. I may make this the predominant topic on Feedback Friday this week because I know it's touchy. I know that in a lot of cases it's grounded in childhood abuse. And so I'm going to go very carefully here. I'm not going to be as, entertainingly exaggerating in some cases because this is tender ground. And we are talking about the concept of intents, and I didn't mean to. And I'm going to use the language of intents versus outcomes, not the kind of left-wing coded, it's about how it landed, not what you meant. I don't believe that what someone meant isn't relevant. In fact, I think it's very relevant. For me, I don't even begin to respond to something if I don't think someone is acting in good faith. I don't engage with people I think are definitely trolling. And my early conversations with people will be primarily to figure out whether I think their intents are good. If they aren't, I end the conversation. And then the conversation gets into this, but I didn't mean to. Okay, I believe you. That's why we're still having this conversation. But the best way to show you didn't mean to is understand why you're getting the outcome you are. But I didn't mean to. And when you keep looping like that, you're dealing with somebody who is not their chronological age. You're dealing with someone who is stuck in a previous version of themselves, usually due to trauma. And that's why I'm being very, very, very careful with this topic, dealing with people's inner child. Now, of course, then there are the people that are just using that to get away with murder. And knowing who's who is very challenging. And it's extremely unfortunate that in a lot of very charged situations, picking up from yesterday's topic, that the people who just don't understand why certain things are landing the way they are get lumped in with the legitimate concern trolls, bad actors, all that stuff. So let me do the help support this channel and we'll get into it more. You see, I'm going very, very cautiously. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Like and subscribe to this channel if you like this content as well. Now, I want to be very clear. No one has the right to tell you what you intended. No one has the right to tell you you did something on purpose. Because you know what's in your head. Now, when you hear something that's kind of ambivalent in that way, it's an understandable human reaction to go into defensive mode. And that can make it very difficult to hear what the other person is trying to explain to you. And again, it makes no sense that you'd bother to explain something to somebody who you think is coming at you in bad faith. That is just giving the other people ammunition. It's something I fucked up way too many times before I stopped doing it. I have just taken to auto-blocking certain people who chase me from platform to platform, continuing a fight that I have made it clear I don't want to have. And so if someone is going, you did this deliberately, you did it on purpose, and you know it's not true, and you tell the person it's not true, and they don't accept it, walk away, end the conversation. It is not going to go well. That is someone, for whatever reason, who's not going to be satisfied until you submit to their will. And they can have all the reasons in the world. Like, they can be very good reasons. It is still a boundary violation, and we all do it sometimes, which is why we all have to accept that that's a boundary violation. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it is doing a bad thing. Boundary violations are not great. They need to be fixed. And so it's one thing to talk about the impact. Impact, that was the word I was looking for. It's not about intense, it's about impacts. That's the left-wing coded word, which is why I'm using outcomes, right? Here's the example. Here's the difference. Situation when we're talking about impacts, you say something that somebody gets hurt by. I'm so hurt. I'm so hurt. You harmed me. You harmed me. You were cruel. You did it on purpose. Right? That's an impact thing. No, you didn't do it on purpose. The outcome is that someone's feelings did get hurt. Doesn't mean you're a horrible monster. Doesn't mean you did it on purpose. And it doesn't mean you have to take responsibility. And with certain mental health conditions that involve emotional dysregulation, professionals say, I have checked this. Professionals say, you're not supposed to take responsibility for the other person's dysregulated emotions. That is enabling, that is making them sicker. So how do we thread this needle? Caring about the impact something had doesn't mean you're responsible for the impact something has. And a caring conversation heals things. A conversation of blame only widens the rift. And eventually, that relationship's going to break if, anybody involved has a remotely healthy self-esteem. Problem is, a lot of people don't. But someone who cares should not be forcing a narrative on you that is not true. If you're saying, I didn't do it on purpose, and they keep saying, yes, you did, yes, you did, yes, you did, that's unhealthy. If you tell somebody, please don't say I did it on purpose, that's deeply upsetting to me, and they keep doing it, they're not coming from a place of caring. Similarly, if there is a bad outcome, not impact, outcome, like impact suggests a deliberate, like a direct hit, right? Where an outcome is more like, oh, there was an accident down the street, so there was traffic and you were late for work. Did the accident deliberately cause you to be late for work? No. So you don't know everything that's going on in someone's head. You don't know everything another person is laboring under at the time. So you can unintentionally hit a sensitivity, and you're not responsible for that. You can care. And strong relationships are based on caring both ways. And if you go from a caring paradigm, you can minimize blame and actually make the relationship stronger from these little bumps instead of destroying it. So when someone tells you that something you said led to them feeling bad, showing caring is important. When we come from backgrounds that are not exactly healthy, the way we've been taught caring is shown, this is going to be hard to hear, is wrong. And this is something I had to learn because I grew up in a not great environment. And so I sort of had to learn that the stuff I was taught people say to each other when they care isn't actually great. And I had to change. And did it terribly matter to anyone but myself what my intents were in trying to show caring in passive aggressive kind of abusive ways? No, because to anybody else, it's passive aggressive and abusive. I had to stop doing it. Why did I not have to want to? Why did I want to stop doing it? Because I kept getting a bad result. I kept getting a bad outcome, and I was interested. I cared enough about the other person to figure out where I was going wrong. And I cared enough about myself to not keep getting received that way. And this doesn't mean you have to do it every single time. It doesn't mean you have to make a change every single time. And this is where healthy self-esteem, this is where emotional regulation comes in. If you have healthy self-esteem, if you are regulated, you don't love when something doesn't go your way, but you can accept it. You don't love when someone doesn't respect boundaries and so you have to cut them off, but you do it. You don't love when that person then continues to hound you, getting their friends involved for over a year, but you accept that that is not something you did. That is a person deeply in denial about how poorly they are doing. You do you, they do them. You have the right to not want to talk to somebody. You also have the right to not be accused of things you didn't do. And ill intent is one of those things that tends to get tossed around, especially on the internet. Thank you, left-wing freaking interdisciplinary critical theory. And in that case, right, it's not about intent, it's about outcomes. I see that thought in the legal system where those sorts of thinkings came from. Like, there's no intent to falsely convict people. Still, if people get falsely convicted, that's not okay. We got to do better, right? Like, it doesn't matter if we meant to create a miscarriage of justice. We got to fix the things that do. And unfortunately, a lot of people, because these big social problems are so rooted in ideology and the idea of what should be, what is, often gets lost. And there's two types of people. The people who go, okay, the outcomes here are not keeping with my values, so I have to change my approach. Other people go, okay, the outcomes here are not keeping with my values. Everyone's against me. I did nothing wrong. People who keep getting bad outcomes and go, I did nothing wrong, that's a real indication of somebody who has piss poor self-esteem and very unstable self-image. And these are hard things. Self-image is something you constantly have to work on, and checking in with yourself and going, am I doing my best when I can? That is what is going to help with this. Now, if you come from, families where individuated self-image that's healthy was not encouraged, especially if you had a parent who was an addict, or at least an addict in the family, but parents hit hardest. This is going to be tough. You've been raised to do the exact opposite of that, because addiction's a family illness. Everything feeds the addiction in one way or the other. And accepting that is tough, because there's an example of, mom or dad didn't mean to be an addict, but they were. And so you were convinced that certain things were loving and supportive, that once again, if there's an addiction, everything in that family feeds the addiction somehow. Not even the person with the addiction. The addiction. And it's very important to recognize that so you can, get distance from those toxic habits. And addicts are great with blame. Great with blame. Everything is everybody else's fault. And addicts are so emotionally stunted that any expression of caring is just like water to a dehydrated person, right? It's the children of addicts like look for tiny little things that to anybody else just seem like, well, that's kind of a shitty thing to say. But to that person, because they are so neglected, it seems like the greatest thing anybody said to them in their lives. And if this describes you, it's very important to recognize that so that, you know, you can make adjustments dealing with other people. And one thing to recognize is not meaning to doesn't fix it. I've had a ton of people that I've talked to get hung up on, I didn't mean to. And okay, that's an important first step. That counts. But you get this all or nothing thinking where, well, if it didn't mean to, it shouldn't bother you. Well, that's not true. Because even if you didn't mean to, it still may have caused inconvenience or outright problems for another person. You know, you didn't mean to be late. You didn't mean to miss deadlines. You didn't mean to not do the assignment. You didn't mean to, you didn't mean to, you didn't mean to. You know, you didn't mean to blow up during that important dinner. You didn't mean to miss a meeting that, you know, was really, they lost a client, whatnot, but you did, you know. You didn't mean to, you know, violate a confidence by talking to the wrong person, but you did. If all you're saying is, I didn't mean to, I don't mean to, I didn't mean to, and you don't progress into what do we do now? How do we make this better? What do I need to do? You're sending the message to the other person that you don't care. And this is the thing, I think that if this premise was understood better, a lot of things like, you know, these social things of what you call something, how you refer to people, the whole pronoun thing, right? If there was more nuance instead of, it's not about intentions, it's about impacts, versus, you know, I didn't mean to, I had no ill intent, therefore it should be okay. If a middle ground between these two things was there, and there was sort of a common understanding, there could be a solution that everybody's happy with. You know, I know a lot of people who get really worked up over pronouns. And this is something I have to stop and not be dismissive about, because for a lot of people, you know, pronouns just are. They're unchanging. They mean fixed things. For me, because not only did I study like Shakespeare and Chaucer, where the language was very different, but also I'm a big fan of international music. And music can sometimes come from cultures that have different pronouns. There are cultures where the inclusive we is a different pronoun than the exclusive we. So for instance, we're talking here, meaning the speaker and the recipient of the message is a different pronoun than we're going to leave, excluding the recipient of the conversation. Interesting stuff. Yeah, right? The idea of they or third person plural. This is true in a lot of romantic languages that aren't English. I'm most familiar with French. We just say they went, not they feminine went, they masculine went. What do you do with mixed groups? You default to the masculine. Much has been written on that. And most people don't do this. Most people just learn language by mimicry. They just think this is the way this is. And change is hard. Change is scary. being the recipient of someone who refuses to change pronouns, understanding why they are so hesitant, that can help a lot, right? It doesn't mean you have to just let them call you the wrong thing. But people tend to be persuaded by people who understand them and seem to be on the same side as them. Inclusive we versus exclusive we. That's why I think that that particular pronoun would be so useful in English. Like, But I do it on It's Not Therapy all the time, that I'll say we're talking about, even though it's usually me talking primarily unless I have a guest. But to me, it's a conversation. It's we, right? I am including the person listening to that podcast. To me, that's an important, not just rhetorical point, but conceptual point, that what I put in those podcasts is not just for me. It's primarily, do I think this is helpful for people being involved? And so the people I'm speaking to are always front of mind when I'm recording that, even though sometimes I just talk to myself for 48 minutes minus breaks. You know, it's a mindset. And I do think that letting people know that it doesn't have to be perfect, you just have to see them trying, is important. But if you're the person resistant to change, you do have to accept that whatever your reasons, that's going to negatively impact the relationship. You know the person doesn't like it. You don't mean to upset them. You just don't understand. But the reality is that you know this is important to the person. You know they're saying, stop calling me that. If you persist, you gotta be prepared to accept consequences for continuing to say something you know upsets the other person, even if you don't mean to. And I hear a ton of people going, well, I didn't think that was the same thing. Well, I thought it was different here. But okay, it wasn't. Make the adjustment. People spend so much time wanting to be understood. And one of the biggest hot takes I have in mental health is like, okay, yeah, that's understandable. We all want to be understood. I think being understood is kind of overrated. Hear me out. I can't expect people to know what it's like to live with my particular version of PTSD. I can't expect people to really understand what it's like to live with an autoimmune disease. I don't expect somebody to really understand, what it's like to live with the other stuff that's probably an offshoot of the autoimmune disease, the asthma, the sensitivities to foods and chemicals and everything outside, and the IBS and, the sleep issues, all that. I can't expect people to really understand what that's like. I do expect them to care. And explaining only goes so far. Nobody's going to know this particular kind of tired unless they have it. Over the weekend, I met a new lady and she was kind of shy until I said, I have an autoimmune disease, so I got to watch that. She goes, I have an autoimmune disease too. And then we were like, she started talking a lot more, because there was that sort of point of innate understanding of, yeah, bodies do weird things. And I think part of the reason she was kind of laid back is she had that thing that, people are going to understand. There are only going to be a few people in this world who really deeply understand you. Nobody else is going to completely understand you, and expecting them to is going to wreck your relationships. Expecting somebody to mind read and anticipate your needs is only going to lead to tragedy and misery. There's a certain acceptance of People are not going to understand. That's not a good expectation. People should care. And the big nope out for me with anybody is when I say that wasn't a deliberate act, that was a trauma response, and they mock it and go, oh, gone. Absolutely gone. And a lot of them don't understand why. And at that point, I have zero interest in explaining it to them. Because not only did they reject what I knew was true, and that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean I don't have to make changes so that doesn't happen again. It's just, it's not this deliberate thing that they're claiming, which means everybody's gotta change things a little bit, even if it's just changing their understanding. A lot of the times it's like, look, you can't push me so hard. When I go, stop assuming it's deliberate, that's not a nice to have, that's something I absolutely need because it's absolutely core to the trauma. And I don't really have time to get into why in this video, but there are very, very good reasons. That's not saying I don't have to take some responsibility for it. I don't mean to get triggered. I have to be acutely aware when I am, and there are times I miss it. There are times it comes on so fast that the inner thing happens before that sort of surge of adrenaline, or the surge of adrenaline kind of blinds me to the fact that it may sound weird, but you don't realize you're kind of cold sweating and shaking until after the adrenaline ebbs. But once you've figured that out, you can't just go, I didn't mean to. You have to go, all right, what put me there? Because I'm not in control once I'm there, how do I take steps to not do that? And those steps can involve, I have to walk away. I have to drop the conversation. I have to say no more often. And yeah, people aren't going to like no. People aren't going to like me backing away from projects or, shutting them down or other things like that. But if I recognize that continuing to be involved in something is going to keep pushing me into trauma because other people's working styles are just not conducive to mine, I don't do well in environments where everything is sit around and be cool and be really good friends and have jam sessions and brainstorm for 8 weeks. And then there's this flurry of activity at the last minute and everything's done. Well, last minute and a bit, deadlines keep getting blown. I know I can't work that way because I have to pace myself. I can't run myself down the way somebody who doesn't have an autoimmune disease does. And it's amazing how many people think that's laziness, and it's just not. It's not that I wouldn't love to be able to pull all-nighters. I just can't. And when people are treating a disease as laziness or trauma as deliberate cruelty, that's a sure sign to step away. And that's the hard part about this. That's the hard part of moving beyond I didn't mean to. That sometimes you do have to recognize that the relationship just isn't working. And that there isn't both ways happening. There isn't compassion flowing both directions. Eventually you'll realize that people are demanding more than you can give. And you can see their point of view, but you just can't do it. And at that point, often the best thing to do is to step away from each other. And that's the thing that is really going to hit that trauma in I didn't mean to people. Because if you've been raised by addicts, if that's rooted in that need to be understood because you were neglected as a kid, the idea that people just go their separate ways, nobody is a bad person, it's just unworkable, is going to hit that fear of abandonment in a really, really meaningful way. And it's going to make it very, very difficult to make the good choices for you. And that's something I'll talk about later on. Like I said, I'm going very, very slowly here because this is the hardest thing I had to learn to do in trauma therapy is end relationships that weren't good for me. It's still hard, but at least I do it now. And it was about realizing that I matter, that I'm not just defined by the people around me. I'm not defined by my friend count. I'm not defined by how many people will say nice things about me versus how many people will say bad things about me. I mean, Jesus, look at Zora Mamdani right now. That guy is either the savior of New York or freaking awful. And there's very little in between. And if that kind of stuff stops you, you can't do things like being mayor of New York. It's part of the job. But when you're neglected and love is conditional growing up, you do really believe that, and people will use that. People will go, look, she has so many conflicts with people. She leaves people behind. This means she's a bad person. She kicked all these people to the curb. You know, like, I run businesses. Sometimes I have to fire people. That's not a character sign. That's a reality of sometimes it's just a bad fit. But people will use that, especially people who know that's a sensitivity because they used to be close to me and they're hitting buttons. They know we're there. Real sign I made the right call, right? It's hard, but if you don't think you're worth it, nobody else is going to. And you don't have to think somebody is a terrible person to step away. In fact, I recommend stepping away before you think somebody's a terrible person. Or try to, my rule of thumb is I try to have the conversation. If the person won't have the conversation from caring and listening and adapting, all parties have to adapt. You know, I'm a big fan of like, look, let's do up a plan so this doesn't happen again. And if it does happen again, there are consequences or a protocol that we all agree to so it feels fair. That's usually when relationships break down because people are not willing to commit to a path going forward. It makes them feel trapped because of their own issues. But for someone like me, that's unworkable. Doesn't mean they're bad people. Some of the things they do afterwards, mischaracterizing what I did, are bad people territory. But in that moment, they're not bad people. It's just not going to work, especially when business is on the line. But it's true of friendships as well. So that's the starting point here. Looking forward to your feedback. I will continue this based on what you guys want to know about intense and how to kind of balance that need to be heard, that desire to be understood with the realities that nobody's going to understand you completely. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching and be well. Like and subscribe if you like this content.